New York State budget passed last Friday. Legislators were concerned over a spending deficit in the bill, but that particular hurdle was avoided in the final draft. We'll have the full contents of that bill later.
Mexico's general elections are scheduled for early July. The rhetoric of Donald Trump provides a tense backdrop for these campaigns. We'll break down the three candidates and their platforms tonight.
And China retaliated to American tariffs and claims of intellectual property theft yesterday. Find out how the newest installment of responding tariffs plays out. This is Talking Points. Tonight on Talking Points, Juanita Perez-Williams is planning a congressional run. Perez-Williams was a candidate in last year's mayoral election in Syracuse. Good evening, I'm Mike Riccardi.
And I'm Josh Carney. Perez-Williams' announcement came last night and is a reversal of her previous stance on the matter.
The former mayoral candidate will challenge fellow Democrat Dana Balter in a June 26 primary to determine who will face Republican John Katko, current representative for New York's 24th District. The move by Perez-Williams surprised many in the Democratic Party, who did not expect a challenger to the designated candidate and who fear a fracturing of the Democratic vote.
Democratic leaders from all four counties in the 24th District released a statement expressing their concern over the matter and reasserting their support for Balter. The statement also addressed alleged meddling in the election from the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee in Washington, D.C. Here to break down the story and explain how the Democrats are moving forward is Talking Points analyst Dan Prager. Dan, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So is there any truth to these accusations about, meddling by the DCCC?
Well, it is hard to say. We do know that the DCCC was trying to recruit strong candidates before everybody endorsed Balter, like Perez-Williams, like Stephanie Minor. But it's hard to say if they were convincing her to run now. Nobody really knows for sure.
Well, does that mean they think that Dana Balter's a weak candidate, if that's the case?
I mean, they very well might. I'm 100% not sure on that. But Balter and Perez-Williams, interestingly enough, have pretty similar stances. They're both pretty liberal, but Perez-Williams definitely has more name recognition. And it would be interesting to see when the last time the DCCC came out and tried to get Perez-Williams to run. Because if it was recent, they might be worried about Balter as a candidate.
And how is that primary challenge ultimately going to affect Balter moving forward?
I think it'll be an interesting one. Balter has huge advantages in the fact that she's got all of these endorsements and she's had the time to fundraise and also set up her campaign so that a lot of Democrats already in
But
their
if she has to
mind,
waste money
Balter's
on,
gonna
beating Williams, even though she's de facto the main...
Absolutely, that could be a huge problem. The good thing is there will probably be a lot of money coming in from the national campaigns later, whoever does win. But I would say that what's interesting is that Perez-Williams is going to kind of need to formulate a specific issue that she differs with Balter on, because right now Perez-Williams, all she has out on her campaign website is a donate button, and all we know about her policies are from what she ran for as mayor.
Well, Balter obviously has the designation from all four counties in the district, so I think that she would have the leg up on Perez-Williams in this case. We haven't seen polling yet, obviously. We don't know what it's going to look like. But in terms of John Katko, right, the last two races that he's won by 20 points, both against Maffei and Colleen Deacon. I think Dana Balter could be the candidate. Obviously, steep hill, but she could give him quite a challenge. Dan, how much do you think Perez-Williams could prevent her from making a serious challenge at John Katko?
I think if there is some sort of divide in the Democratic Party here, that's a big deal. Katko obviously running unopposed because he's the incumbent, and you really need a full coalition in this district where it's incredibly close. Even if Perez-Williams takes off maybe 5% of the vote of Democrats who are disillusioned, that could make all of the difference. The good thing for Balter is that she kind of has like I said before, has very similar policies to what Perez-Williams ran for on mayor, and they're both very liberal, so hopefully for both of them, they're probably not going to make it sort of an intense campaign where they're fighting each other.
Well, certainly a race that we're going to be watching all the way through here on Talking Points. Dan, thanks so much for breaking it down for us.
Thank you.
A presentation about rezoning possibilities in Syracuse took place last night. Talking Points reporter Suni Balkin went to Henniger High School to find out how this might affect the area surrounding Syracuse University.
A presentation in a series of public meetings about the third draft of Rezone Syracuse took place last night at Henniger High School. This gave the public a chance to learn about the new zoning ordinance that may be passed in the coming months. If passed, one of the goals of the new rezoning plan is to create more efficient land usage. The rezoned Syracuse plan has classified some areas around the city from MX1 to MX5, based on factors like the density of population and what can be built. Zoning Administrator Heather Lamandola tells us what this means for building on MX1 classified places like Euclid Avenue in the future.
The character area that correlates to MX1 was called Adaptive Mansion Corridor. So if you kind of think about that in your mind, you're thinking about larger residential structures with bigger front yards, and that have been mainly used for residential, but now this MX1 is encouraging small-scale, low-intense retail and restaurant use.
This means places like Euclid Avenue may start to look more and more like Westcott Avenue, with places like Boom Babies and Reese's popping up all over. Lamandola says the land usage ordinance are outdated, and the changes brought with MX1 zoned areas are necessary to keep up with the times.
You know, we're not up to date with some of the land uses that are coming to fruition around the state, things like microbreweries and doggy daycare. So we try to incorporate those into the zoning ordinance, allow them as uses, enumerate them as uses, and also define them. So there are some things lacking in the current ordinance that we needed to define and actually enumerate. So the MX1 district hopefully will encourage that type of investment while protecting the neighborhood at the same time.
Comments, concerns, and suggestions on the plan are due by April 27, 2018. You can contact them at rezonesyracuse@syrgov.net. For Talking Points Citrus TV, I'm Sunny Balkin.
The Zoning Board had its last meeting tonight. We'll keep you updated on the future of the map.
And just before the deadline, the state of New York passed a $168.3 billion budget. The budget includes ways in which New Yorkers will be able to reduce potential harm from the federal tax code, new laws surrounding sexual violence, and manage to avoid a disastrous multi-billion-dollar deficit. Here to talk us through some of the details of the legislation are Talking Points analysts Gilat, Melamed, and Conor Wight. Both of you, thanks so much for joining us here. Now, quickly, obviously, in everything in politics, there's winners and there's losers. Conor, can you break down some of the winners?
Well, some of the winners are state Democrats, including Governor Cuomo, and that's mainly because they were able to, at least in a rhetorical sense, show that they were fighting back against the federal, Republican-controlled government by trying to mitigate some of the harm that the new federal tax code may impose on New York. Some feared that the tax code capping state and local tax deductions at $10,000 could mean that some of the higher earners in the state, some businesses could leave. Now, what they've done is that they've set up a way in which charitable foundations set up by local governments will allow some of that pain to be alleviated on taxpayers.
In Gilat, the losers?
Yeah, well, a lot of those higher taxpayers come from New York City area and the surrounding areas, and the mayor there, Bill de Blasio, he's definitely a big loser in this. I hate to say it, but it's true. Governor Cuomo showed a lot of strength against New York City in terms of running transparency with the school district there, which is mayor controlled. He's making the city pay for half of the new MTA plans, which de Blasio wants the state to completely fund. So definitely trying to take a lot out on de Blasio.
And from January till now, it's only been 4 months, but we had a $4.4 billion deficit in New York State in January. And then Cuomo was able to get rid of it. How?
Yeah, well, one of the things, that happened before the budget, was the state actually sold Fidelis Health Insurer, and that gave them $2 billion. So that was a big thing before the budget. Also before the budget, they underestimated how much revenue they were going to get. They got $750,000 in revenue before this budget was passed that they didn't expect.
And Conor, what about right here in Syracuse? What's the impact on this community?
Well, the thing that is specifically impacting this community is the amount of funding that is going to the Syracuse City School District. They had asked for $12 million additional funding. They only got around 4.6. So obviously, that's a huge gap that they now have to fill up. They're looking at a $24 million debt that they have to fill up, and they lost some of that federal grant money that they were asking for.
And when you look at Cuomo, and you look at what people are kind of concerning themselves with, between the rhetoric and what he's trying to do in New York State, there's obviously a focus towards his reelection. So how does this kind of affect his reelection campaign and the passing of this bill?
Yeah, well, I think it shows he's taking the challenge from Cynthia Nixon pretty seriously, actually. He's giving a lot of funding to NYCHA, New York City Housing Authority, which she's been a big advocate for, saying he's not giving enough funding to the public housing projects there. you see if you look at the different, if you break down the education parts of this budget, there's a lot more than there was last year in terms of different education items. Nixon's a big education advocate, but I'd also go as far as to say it sets him up for a 2020 presidential run with the new tax codes that kind of go around the federal tax codes, and he could say, as governor, I actually did something to prevent the effects of the Trump tax code.
And that's really what we're looking at. We're looking at this, people are talking about this idea with the midterms coming up that there's a blue wave sort of in reaction to people looking at President Trump and Republicans negatively, and the rhetoric of saying that he sort of, looked at Trump and spat him in the face with the way that he set up the tax code is something that rhetorically could work well for him with most voters.
And obviously the Me Too movement obviously being very prominent as of recent times. How is this addressed in this bill? Quickly.
Well, there were a few key things. One of them was that a loophole was closed, which meant that police can no longer have sexual relations with people that are within their custody, claiming that it was consensual. Another big thing is the preservation of rape kits are now. It's now required that they are to be kept for 20 years. It was previously just 30 days. So that's a huge step in the right direction.
All right, Conor and Gilat, thanks so much for being here. Protests at the Gaza-Israeli border caused tensions to spike this weekend. Analyst Jack Watson is here to explain the conflict. He joins us after the break.
They call me Maxie, but I prefer tripod. I was your above-average four-legged homie and then wham-bam minivan. Some people pity me. Now that's lame. I still run, fetch, and swim. And the ladies love me. I'm the ultimate wingman. Just don't ask me to high five.
Everybody has a dream. Mine was to see the ocean. And with a little help, I made it.
They'll test you. Try to break your will. But however loud the loudness gets, however many cheese puffs may fly, you're the driver, the one in control. Stand firm. Just wait. And move only when you hear the click that says they're buckled in for the drive. Never give up till they buckle up.
Tension at the Gaza-Israeli border grew this weekend as Palestinian protesters clashed with Israeli soldiers. For more on the conflict and why the protests are important, we go to Talking Points analyst Jack Watson.
Thanks, Josh. Protests started last Friday at the Gaza-Israeli border, leading to several deaths and a spike in strained relations between the already tense factions. Israeli soldiers reportedly opened fire on a crowd of thousands of protesters last Friday, leading to several reports of up to 21 people dead as of today and hundreds more wounded since. Israeli denies any wrongdoing in the incident, saying that the soldiers fired against protesters that are trying to, quote, sabotage the country's border fence. Israeli officials also allege that at least 10 of the people killed were, quote, terrorists linked to Hamas. Today, reports indicate that an Israeli airstrike killed a Palestinian man. Another Palestinian who was protesting at the border last week reportedly died of his wounds. Now, the protesters had planned a 6-week-long protest. They wanted to allow the Palestinians who originally lived in this area, all the surrounding areas in Israel that were originally appropriated in the late 1940s because of following the Nazi Holocaust. World leaders at the time saw it necessary to create a Jewish state in this area, leading to several hundreds of thousands of Palestinians being displaced, and the land has been disputed by Palestinians ever since. The protest organizers are saying that the protest will continue until May 15th, which is the 70th anniversary of Israel's creation. The protests spawned heated rhetoric from heads of state in the region as Turkish leader Tayyip Erdogan claimed Israel's prime minister was, quote, a terrorist for his country's actions toward the protesters. Netanyahu replied by accusing Turkey of bombing civilians in its foreign actions. More protests are expected in the fallout of Friday's deaths, which was Gaza's most violent day since the border war in 2014.
Thanks, Jack. And Mexican elections are scheduled for July 1st. 3 candidates will be seeking to take power from outgoing President Enrique Peña Nieto. The elections will come midway through the second year of President Trump's term, and his rhetoric towards Mexico and border security are a key issue in this summer's elections. Here to give us more details on the 3 presidential candidates is Talking Points analyst Anthony Dabbundo.
The Mexican people are heading to the polls this July to elect a new president. Mexicans will also vote for 500 members in the Chamber of Deputies and 138 members in the Mexican Senate. The presidential race is split between 4 major candidates, with recent polling data suggesting that Andrés Manuel López Obrador is the frontrunner. López Obrador is making his 3rd attempt at the presidency after finishing 2nd to current President Enrique Peña Nieto in 2012. López Obrador represents the leftist Morena Party and has taken a populist stance on issues facing relations between the United States and Mexico. He has asked for a delay in NAFTA negotiations between the 2 countries until after the election. The presidential frontrunner has also proposed an increase in spending to support pensions for the elderly and universal access to public colleges. Second in the current polls is National Action Party candidate Ricardo Anaya Cortez. Cortez has campaigned on cracking down on government corruption and increasing transparency. He is building a center-right coalition to counter the left-wing populism from López Obrador. Third in the polls is former Secretary of Finance Jose Antonio Meade Cabrera. Cabrera worked under President Peña Nieto as recently as 2017 when he resigned to seek the presidency. Cabrera is struggling to gather momentum because Peña Nieto's approval rating stands at just 17%, and both belong to the same conservative institutional revolutionary party. American President Donald Trump looks to play a key factor in the Mexican elections, with both sides digging in to fight on the key issues of trade and border negotiations.
You said President Trump with some pretty strong anti-Mexican rhetoric when it comes to terms with immigration and the trade deals with Mexico. How do you think that has affected the election thus far?
What we've seen so far is that Peña Nieto isn't particularly popular in Mexico right now. His approval rating is around 18%. And what that means is that there's been a lot of rhetoric that Trump has said in the past during the campaign in 2016 and 2017 since he's taken office. He's been very anti-Mexico. And the Mexican people are not very happy with Peña Nieto. They think that he has been too weak with Trump. He hasn't done enough to stand up to him. And what that's led to has been a rise in left-wing populism. López Obrador has used the anti-Trump rhetoric in Mexico to funnel his campaign and take a huge lead in the polls. Recent polls are suggesting he's up by 15, 16, potentially even 20 points on the second candidate, who is more of the right-wing candidate. So it's kind of spewed about this left-wing populism where Trump is going on Twitter and suggesting that we need to end the DACA deal and we need to strengthen the border wall. He's gone on and said that the Mexican people in the past, he's called them rapists. He's made all these comments, and the Mexican people say, well, what about us? So they're turning to López Obrador to funnel their frustrations.
Thanks, Anthony.
China let out a series of tariffs on American exports over the week. To find out more about what that means to the American economy, stay with us.
Hey, look, it's those guys. Are you good to drive?
I'm fine.
How many did you have?
I should be fine.
You should be.
Go and step out of the vehicle for me.
See ya, buddy. Good luck. So turns out, buzz driving and drunk driving, they're the same thing, and it costs around $10,000. So not worth it.
What are you, superheroes?
Just 4 brothers who hate bullies and love this city. Gear up, guys.
Yesterday, the Chinese government announced new tariffs on American products, including airplanes, cars, and soybeans. President Trump insisted that the U.S. is not in a trade war with China. He also accused China of intellectual property theft. Take a listen to a Chinese official's response.
As for the media reports you cited, I think I'd like to use the term President Trump often loves to say and call them fake news.
And joining us now to break it down are Talking Points analysts Michael Furnari and Brandon Ross. Now, guys, we just heard the Chinese Commerce Minister not buying what President Trump is saying. Now, we have some breaking news tonight, just very recently, that President Trump is planning on issuing $100 billion worth of tariffs against China. Brandon, your thoughts on that?
I think it really shows that President Trump is willing to go far with these tariffs just to get what he wants out of it. He certainly is not relenting and is hoping to get something out of China.
And I will add that last year we did trade with China worth, I think, $506 billion, which between the $50 billion we just issued and this upcoming $100 billion, you're talking nearly one-third of trade with China.
And when we look specifically to those measures being put in place, what are we kind of looking for and why, Mike?
Well, I think an important point, if you're talking about the why for why this is happening, is President Trump has been campaigning against free trade since the start of his campaign. This is an issue he's been very consistent with. Now, for the first year or so of the presidency, he kind of reined in his stances there. But as you're noticing, some of the more moderate Republican voices and some of the more traditionally conservative voices, like former academic advisor Gary Cohn, are now gone. And now most of those advisors are not willing to split with Trump on this issue. I think that's empowering him to make these moves.
Brandon, do you echo that?
Yeah, I totally agree. And you see it with the tariffs that China's retaliating with. They announced over 100 new tariffs on American goods. Some of these include soybeans, cars, whiskey, and even airplanes that are between 15,000 and 45,000 kilograms. A lot of those are very Midwest-centered agriculture goods, and you can see that they're trying to hit Trump's home base there.
And Michael, President Trump has denied that this is creating a trade war. Now, I think, obviously President Trump has done things that play to his conservative base, but broadly speaking, the economy has been doing very well under President Trump, and that's something that applies to everybody. A, is this devolving into a trade war? And B, how does that risk President Trump's accomplishments?
Well, you said it. You mentioned the phrase trade war, and that's a very big part of what we're looking at. Now we've seen multiple retaliatory measures from both sides, and that could be what this devolves into. And it doesn't seem like he's really afraid of that. I mean, if you remember the tweet, he did say trade wars are good and easy to win. And I think that that's going to be very difficult for him politically because the economy is really the only thing he has going for him right now politically. And if they're risking this, and especially risking this in the heartland of America, that could be very concerning for Republicans going forward.
Brandon, is there an end in sight in these retaliatory tariffs?
I think we could see this go on for quite a while. And as you see with the first 100 tariffs that China laid out, noticeably left out are rare earth elements and technology used for most of America's computers. And if China even dares to touch that in terms of tariffs, that could be really damaging to the American consumer.
Well, we're talking about this in terms of hitting Trump's home base, looking at it in terms of what he's got going for himself, on top of Chinese and American relations. So when you talk about the political ramifications of this action and of potentially a devolving trade war, what are you looking towards when it comes to both sides having political ramifications?
I think we're going to try to look to see how the GOP outside of President Trump reacts to these measures. I think a good example is Congressman Jim Renacci out of Ohio. He's currently running for Senate, and he has been a staunchly pro-free trade representative. But as you can see, in the Midwest, these tariffs are running very popular with the working class base.
You even saw Conor in the Pennsylvania special election, the Democrat, play into the trade, into the tariffs.
Exactly, and especially since Renacci's been so free trade, he's trying to balance exactly where he should stand on this at risk going against his base.
Michael, very quickly, your final thoughts.
Well, one final thought on this issue is one thing to watch. Now that the measures are going to be retaliatory, even though they may be polling well now, what's going to happen is people are going to start seeing their wallets affected by this issue, and that could change the polling on this one.
All right, Michael Furnari and Brandon Ross, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure.
Supreme Court case about a California law started today. SCOTUS analyst Shruti Marathe will be here to explain. Stay tuned.
Got a quarter? They said a bottle was just a bottle. That no one would ever notice me. But I knew I could be more. That one day, I would make people smile.
Here we go. We're gonna go out there in the rain. You're gonna get wet. All right, here we go. Go, okay, oh yeah, yes. So much fun. Mwah. We're getting so wet. Oh,
The Supreme Court recently heard oral arguments in the case of the National Institute of Family and Life Advocates versus Becerra. The case challenges if the California Reproductive Act violates First Amendment rights. The act requires all licensed clinics to provide information about low-cost family planning, contraception, and abortion services. It also compels unlicensed clinics to inform patients about their unlicensed status. Here to break down the case is Talking Points Supreme Court analyst Shruti Marathe. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So when we look at how this is a First Amendment case and how it infringes upon free speech, what does that look like?
Well, basically, these unlicensed clinics are saying that their speech is being compelled and they're being unfairly targeted by being required to say that they're an unlicensed clinic, by being required to tell women that they have access to free and low-cost abortions if they're from a low-income family. Even if they don't, the clinics themselves don't believe in providing abortions to them, they then feel like it's compelled speech.
And Shruti, why was this law initially enacted?
Well, there are a lot of unlicensed clinics that were duplicitous in nature. A lot of websites showed that they could allow women to get abortions at their clinics even though they weren't even designed in that way. Sometimes they would delay appointments to the point where women couldn't even get abortions because they're too late in their pregnancies. And even during oral arguments, Justice Sotomayor brought up how the websites work and called into question.
And when we look at, how...
I think we have some audio from Sonia Sotomayor.
The website also says clients will be evaluated by nurses and that they follow all HIPAA regulations, which if they're not a medical provider, they don't have to follow HIPAA. If a reasonable person could look at this website and think that you're giving medical advice, would the unlicensed notice be wrong?
So in that soundbite, you heard that Justice Sotomayor is basically saying these websites look like they can provide these women with abortions, and the fact that they can't means that they're basically faking women out to think that they could get an abortion.
And when you're talking about that discrepancy and looking towards the future of this ruling, how do you see it going?
It's really going to come down to what Justice Kennedy rules. If you look at Justice Kennedy's past rulings, especially in Planned Parenthood versus Casey, you see that he has ruled in the case of abortion rights, but we'll just have to wait and see.
Absolutely. All right, Shruti Marathe, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
That's all we have for Talking Points tonight. I'm Josh Carney.
And I'm Mike Riccardi. Follow Citrus TV News on Facebook and Twitter for more content. Check out citrustv.com/talkingpoints for all of our webisodes and articles.
And don't forget to tune in next Thursday for a brand new episode of Talking Points. Have a good night, Syracuse.